Good morning. This is Michelle Lark and Neil Brosnan at CMS. We're going to talk you through today a guide to preparing your payment summaries, and hopefully by the end of this you'll feel a lot more confident about the process and how you can make sure you get it right. These are the things we're going to cover with you today, which are things to check before you do the last pay in June, so that'll be getting fairly close for most people. I'm going to step you through the preparation of the employee's payment summary preparation, and also we just want to highlight too that the due dates for these are fairly tight, with the ATO being the 14th of August, and that you need to have them to your employees by the 14th of July. So you really don't have a lot of time to mess about too much, and you need to get them ready quite quickly. So these are the things that you can check now. You need to make sure that all your employees have their tax file number in either your electronic accounting system or in your paper file, such that you've got that ready to prepare their payment summary with. You also need to have their date of birth and their current mailing address, because that information is actually required before you can complete the payment summaries. You need to also ensure that all your employees who've been paid during the year have active cards and can be seen in your payroll reports. This is even if they've only worked 1 or 2 pays for you. You need to make sure that you prepare a payment summary for them, even if they've gone on to another employer having left you. So the cut-off date for the payment summaries is actually the last physical payment made to your employees. So even if there are some days in the payroll, the first payroll in July, that belong to June, those payments go into next year's payment summaries. So the last time you pay your employees in June, physically into their bank accounts, is the last pay for the purposes of the payment summary.
And Michelle, our following presentation is aimed at organisations who use software to record their payroll activity. However, if you have manual records, the same basic principles apply.
That's right. Neil's asking for some clapping, people. What we've given you here is the checklist that we use at CMS for our payroll clients. And this is designed to just try and make sure that you go through each step that's required and that you can be quite systematic about it. The biggest key to getting these payment summaries right is really to have all the information to hand when you start doing them, so that you're not having to go backwards and forwards. So this is a good little check to make sure you've got everything in one place for it. We also create a separate electronic folder for the payment summaries, so that all your electronic documentation is also kept in one place. What we tend to do is mark off the date and who did it, and then this goes on the front of our paper copy file and also our electronic one, so we know exactly where everything is at any stage. So there's some things to consider before you really get too much into the process of preparing financial statements, and this goes back to our comment about making sure you have all the information to hand. So there's things to think about. You need to have any information for any termination payments that were made to employees during the period. You also need to make sure that you have any information about back pays. And this applies whether somebody was made redundant or whether they resigned. So any one of those sort of final pays to anybody, you need to have that information to hand. You need to understand what sort of terminations were made. So did they resign? Was it a genuine redundancy? What were the circumstances under which payments were made to staff that would be outside the ordinary? Then you need to consider, if you haven't already, whether an ETP summary is required. So this is a eligible termination payment summary the ATO requires, and it's to do with concessional tax treatments for various payments. Now, if you haven't done that during the year, we will talk a bit more about that further on, but certainly if you're concerned that you've made someone redundant, you may not have paid them or taxed them correctly, then you need to either get in touch with us or your accountant to get some more information on that. You also need to identify any staff who made salary sacrifices during the financial or the tax year, and you need to know what sort of salary sacrifices they were. So was it super? Was it something else? And is there any FBT implications as a result of that? Did anybody resign during the period? If so, what was the date? Did you make any payments for unused annual leave or unused long service leave to them? That comes back to those kind of sort of termination type payments. There are different tax rules around those at times. You also need to identify any other deductions that were made, such as additional tax that people might have asked you to deduct from their wages, social club membership, and you also need to identify any allowances paid to staff during the year. So that would be car allowances, uniform allowances, those sorts of things. In some cases, they're treated differently from just normal income. For example, car allowance can be treated differently. If you've got any fringe benefits tax, hopefully you've already got some professional help about how to deal with that, or that you use some sort of FBT service, and they'll be able to provide you with the reports you need. There's also something called reportable employment superannuation charge. We will talk about that a bit more later, but that's a situation where if somebody's salary sacrificing some super, it may need to come onto their payment summary as well. And then, are there any other deductions? Has anybody had child support withheld? Has anybody been repaying you for some training? Those sorts of things. You just need to have that information to hand so that you know how to link things for the payment summary going forward.
So Michelle, the biggest part of the process is this preparation stage and doing the homework before you actually get to the printing the summaries, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. The more information you have to hand and the better organised it is, the more easily the whole process works, because it is quite a methodical stepping through process. And you really don't want to get to the situation where you've got to stop and start and go back and find out some more information. So these are the sorts of things that we do. We make sure we've got the files there and we're all ready to go before we print a single report. So this is the first report that we would suggest you run, and it's usually called the Payroll Activity Summary Report. And what it shows you, if you can see the mouse, is you've got the gross wages for the year, any salary sacrifice that might have been done. Now in MYOB that's often called deductions, that column, and the PAYG being the tax you've withheld. So the last column will also usually be the superannuation expense that was accrued during the year for all your employees. The thing to remember is that these reports will usually be what you've actually paid. So all of these figures should be as per your last pay before or on the 30th of June. So the first step you really have to take is to make sure that your financial records are complete up until the day at which you want to prepare your your payment summary, So that means that all your bank transactions are in, that your PAYG, if you've paid it, that you've posted that payment into your ledgers, and that really your bank transactions are all in up to date. And what this means is that when we start to talk about reconciling figures, you're looking at the complete picture. You're not missing any parts of it. So it's really, really important. Get all your financial information together, get it all into your software, make sure you can do a bank reconciliation mid-month or mid-period on whatever day it is you want to start going ahead and preparing your payment summaries. So then once you've done all of that and you're happy that it reconciles, you need to print the payroll activity statement. And you need to do this for the period the 1st of July 2015 to the 30th of June 2016. And those dates apply regardless of what your financial year is. So if you're a P&C and your financial year runs from the 1st of January to the 31st of December, it doesn't matter. You still do your payment summaries from the 1st of July 2015 to the 30th of June 2016. You also want to print profit and loss from the 1st of July 2015 to the 30th of June 2016. Now, if you are a Kinder or a P&C that has a January to December year end, you'll probably have to do this in two parts. So you'll have to print one from the 1st of July to the 31st of December and the 1st of January to the 30th of June and add the two numbers together. It is a little bit tricky, but really it's doable. And what we are aiming to do with these reports is to just make sure that the information that's held within the payroll system agrees to what's held within the financial records themselves. So we need to make sure that we've got all our wages in the right place, all our tax in the right place, and all our super in the right place. That's the process we're going to run through for you now. So what you can see on this slide with the pink highlighting is that we want to match PAYG in the payroll system, which is the tax we've withheld from our employees, to what's actually ended up in the general ledger account for the PAYG withholding. And you can see there that in the total credit column, which is where this should end up if you've got all your software set up properly, our balance is $18,087 credit. And that's the tax we've withheld from the 1st of July to the 30th of June from our employees. This second report down the bottom here is actually from the payroll module, and you can see there that it matches. We're saying, yep, when we add up all our individual employees, our PAYG withheld is $18,087. So we know we've got all our tax in the right place. And that $18,087 is essentially the figure that we should have sent to the ATO during the year. There might be obviously just June's left to go, but it means that all our records are all matching up and then we can proceed. On our next slide here, what we're doing is we're matching up our total wages and our total super. And this is, again, to make sure that our financial records match our payroll records. And we have seen in the past some situations where there's been some glitches with payroll modules, and this is how we picked it up. We reconciled our payroll module to our financial records and we realised there was a difference, so we knew we had to go and look for it. So what you can see here, pink arrow to pink arrow, is that the gross wages, which is the amount of wages before we take any tax out, matches what our profit and loss says our wages are. Now, in this example, it's just one profit and loss. This might be a childcare centre that runs from 1 July to 30 June. You might find you have to do it in Excel and you would have two wages and salaries figures to add together to get the total. And you may have two superannuation figures to add together to get the total. And what is a little bit confusing is that your payroll module does run the 1st of July to the 30th of June, even when your financial periods don't. They might run January. So you just have to be a little bit careful to make sure you're always comparing the same periods with the same period in the payroll module. So once you know that your total wages and your total super agree, give yourself a big pat on the back. If they don't agree, you're going to go and have to ferret around and have a look. And the easiest way to do that is to have a look at your general ledger detail report. And what you're looking for is things like perhaps contract staff who might be in the wages and salaries, but obviously you don't pay them, so you would exclude their costs. There might be some reallocations you've done from wages and salaries to things like annual leave or sick leave provision accounts. And so you would need to add those amounts back in to get your total wages figure. Yep. So what you really want to do is just have a browse through your general ledger account for your wages and salaries and just see if there's anything in there that's not a payroll journal. And if there isn't, then you need to figure out whether you're going to add that back, take it off to bring you back to your wages figure.
Very good.
Yeah.
So this following screen basically goes over what Michelle was saying before in terms of if your financial year is different to is a calendar year is distinct from a 30 June year, a tax year. So just have a read of that, and just tells you what steps, a couple of steps to follow. You might have two parts to make up your P&L, or to get the figures that you're trying to match to your payroll reports.
As we say here, what we will do later is just talk a little bit more about salary sacrifice, or where your staff paying additional tax. We can give you some examples of that. So we have to be really clear here, and essentially if your wages, PAYG and super figures don't reconcile to your profit and loss, you need to understand why not. If they don't, you're at risk of having incorrect information in your payment summaries, which can cause trouble for you with the ATO and trouble for your employees. So it's really important that you get this stage right before you go any further. This is an example of the reconciliation report we use, and you can see the payroll activity summary report at the top there, and again you'll see it's for the period the 1st of July to the 30th of June, and that's the tax year that we're talking about. So it will list down all your employees, it will give you your gross wages, any deductions that were withheld, your tax that was withheld during the year, and the last column is your superannuation. So we do a little reconciliation where we say, this is what my payroll activity statement says. We'll show you later on there's a verification report that you can use. That's where these figures come from, and we reconcile to make sure that the two agree. What we also do is we say, these are the instalment activity statements by month, or in this case it's a quarterly BAS. These are what we've reported to the ATO during the year, and therefore the difference at the end of the year is what goes into our final BAS for 30 June. And what this makes sure is that if you made any adjustments or corrections during the year and perhaps you didn't properly reflect them in your instalment activity statement or your BAS, this is the opportunity to fix it up with the ATO. Also, you'll see in the red heading, it talks about work cover declaration. Everybody should be paying work cover. And what's really important to remember here is that this figure is actually your gross wages plus your super. That is the amount you need to declare for work cover, not just your wages. Okay? If you're a CMS payroll client, we would send you this report and you would have that figure ready to pick up. So this is the format that we use to just make sure everything's right and that what we're going to send to the ATO is correct.
So Michelle, in the deduction column, the important thing is if you've got any amounts in that column that you need to ascertain what these relate to, unpack them. So find out their salary sacrifice, whether they're extra tax, whether they're union fees or whatever they are, because you'll need to, depending on what they are, they'll need to go in different places in your in the payment summary. So it's very important that you dig in and find out that information before you again proceed further into this steps.
Yeah, so for example, if you've got salary sacrifice super in that deduction column, that actually has the effect of reducing the gross wages that you're going to be reporting in your payment summary. So as Neil says, you really need to understand what the figures in that deduction column represent so that you know that later on you're treating them correctly. So now we are fully reconciled. We've got all our information to hand, impeccably filed and in alphabetical order, and we're going to begin the process of actually doing the payment summary. Now we use MyOb, so that's the example that we're going to walk you through. The process is not dissimilar in any of the other accounting software packages. The language tends to remain the same and the process tends to remain the same. But MyOb does it in a very clear and precise way, so that's why we've chosen to demonstrate using this model. So in your payroll control panel, you're going to go up where the blue circle one is and say print your payment summaries. Now one thing I will say to you about MyOb is don't worry about pressing this button and starting. You can go through and do this as many times as you need to get it right. So please don't be concerned about beginning the process and then perhaps making a mistake along the way. It is very forgiving in what it allows you to fix up. So this is the first screen you'll see, and for everybody you're going to be choosing the top option, which is what it defaults to, which is individual non-business. What you end up with out the other end of all of this is really just plain old A4 paper with the payment summary printed on it. and an electronic signature. So really all you have to do in this screen is just go through it and say next, and it will bring you to the next option, which is your company information. Now this information is quite important because this is the information that goes to the ATO on the payment summary. So you need to make sure that it's up to date and that it's correct. So it will be your company name, your trading name, the business address, who the contact person is really, their phone number and email. So this is if the ATO has any queries or if the employees have any queries, then this is the best person for them to talk to. You need to have your ABN and you need to have the name of the authorised signatory. Now this is the name that appears as an electronic signature on the payment summaries. So this person needs to be a member of the executive committee. They need to be an authorised representative of the business. The next screen that will come up on MyOb is this payment summaries field. And this is where you're linking the various types of pays that you make to your employees to where it's going to appear on the payment summary. So the first one that comes up is your gross payments. And essentially, this will be all the normal everyday sorts of things that you pay to your employees. So you can see from the list on the right where the little ticks are, if it has a tick, it's going to go to the gross payment summary box in your payment summary. So these are kind of the standards: base hours, base salaries, any bonuses, broken shift allowance. Neil's just pointed out that the base hour P&C isn't ticked on this one, but it would normally be. But also you'll see things like overtime, public holidays, sick pay go in here. And what further down you'll see unused holiday pay and unused long service leave. Now what we should clarify here is that these are unused leave on resignation. If you made somebody redundant and you paid them their unused holiday pay or long service leave, it goes somewhere different. So for the purposes of this, just take those as resignations. You can also see what will look a bit funny down towards the bottom is that salary sacrifice is ticked. Now the reason for that is if somebody makes salary sacrifice or something like superannuation, it actually reduces the amount of gross payments that we report to the ATO, because that's how the lesser tax is calculated. So even though that is a deduction, you want to include it into the gross payments schedule. And as I said before, if you make a mistake and you get through the process and you realise you're missing something, you can come back to these screens and tick or untick as you need to. So just have a really good long hard think about what your normal pays are and make sure that all of those categories are ticked. So here again, just in summary, if an employee has unused annual leave or unused long service leave on resignation, these amounts will be linked to the gross payments. So those will just go in with their normal income. That's the way you should have taxed it at the time, and that's the way the taxman will tax it as well. As I mentioned, salary sacrifice superannuation goes to gross payments, and I have explained that already. That's really just to ensure that the gross wages are reduced by any of the salary sacrifice amounts. The other thing too is if a ETP payment summary was issued to any employee, this is actually excluded from the payment summaries. An ETP payment summary is a separate document. So we'll talk a little bit more about that further on, but don't go ticking ETP payment names and putting them in gross payments, because that's where they don't belong.
Michelle, with long service leave, if someone's been there, I think prior to 1993, there could be some, it may need to be treated slightly different. So if you've got any of that case, well then go to the ATO to find that information. But generally, most people are going to be falling into these categories.
Yeah. The ATO does have quite a good guide, some good guides around how to tax and how to treat on payment summaries these kind of payments. So I would recommend ATO website for those things. There's quite some thorough guidance on where to put it.
Now you'll notice that what happens in MyOb in particular is as you're going down the left-hand side, it opens up payroll categories on the right, the system basically stops you from picking the payroll category on the right in more than one location, because they're obviously would duplicate stuff. So
yeah. Yeah, so that's right. So if you've made a mistake and you think, oh gosh, the uniform allowances shouldn't be in gross payments, it won't actually let you tick it if it's already ticked in gross payments. You'll have to go back, untick it in gross payments, and then come back in. But don't worry, you're not undoing anything else. As I said, MyOb's very forgiving in this regard. So the allowances, and probably a more common one for most people that we deal with, would be travel allowance. That gets treated as an allowance for the purposes of the ATO. So in that instance, allowance 1 might be car allowance, and you would then tick payroll category car allowance to the allowance. Things like senior teacher allowances, locality allowances, those sorts of things all go into gross payments. They don't get treated as allowances. If you're unsure, again, the ATO has a pretty good document regarding that, but also you'll see on our next slide, we summarise for you which allowances go where. So anything to do with working conditions, qualifications, or special duties should have been taxed as normal income, and they simply go into gross payments. So really the only one most of you would have would perhaps be car allowance, and those would come down as an allowance rather than a gross payment.
and probably
Uniform. Yeah, uniform would. But split shift and all of those kinds of things all go up into gross payments. So if you're unsure, this will give you a bit of guidance on that. And again, the ATO has quite a good fact sheet on what belongs where. Or if you've got time on your hands, you could always ring them and ask, just for fun. So this table is the guidance from the ATO about where various unused annual leave and unused long service leave payments go. And this is what we were talking about before, is it's really important to understand why somebody left. Were they made redundant? Were they fired? Did they resign? You know, was there some sort of invalidity? And this determines where it goes on the payment summary. So in the first box, it talks about unused annual leave and leave loading, and it's accrued from 1993. Most of you will have that scenario. That goes into gross payments. Again, long service leave, and this is what Neil was referring to earlier with these dates. If it's accrued from 1993, it goes into gross payments. If it was accrued prior to that, you do need to split it up, and it goes to lump sum payment A or B. If somebody was made redundant and they were paid unused annual leave and leave loading, it'll go into lump sum payment A. Unused long service leave accrued after 1978 will also go into lump sum payment A. What this might mean is that if you've had staff during the year, some of whom resigned and were paid out unused leave, and some of whom were made redundancy and paid out unused leave, you will actually have to set up 2 separate categories, payroll categories for those. We call them unused annual leave on resignation, unused annual leave on redundancy. And the reason we do that is that way you're able to link the different types of payments to the different places on the payment summary. So you might have to go back and make some adjustments. If you need to do that, probably best you give us a call, or your bookkeeper a call, or your MyOb expert as to how to do that. But you will need to be able to put them in multiple places. Now, Neil's just pointed out that these genuine redundancy and early retirement scheme down the bottom here, these limits are actually a little bit out of date. So if you do have that scenario, you need to have a word with the taxman or your accountant and find out exactly what those limits are. But for our experiences, certainly because the limits now are even higher, we've never had anybody who's actually exceeded them. But there are special tax concessions around that. So if you're not sure, go and get some expert help. So this is a continuation of the MyOb screens. And what you can see here is that what we were just talking about. So in the left, you've got lump sum payments A, termination, lump sum payments A, redundancy. So that's where we're saying, and you can see our tick on the right-hand side is unused annual leave on redundancy. So that's where it goes, lump sum payment A. So you might find that this is where you end up with different types of payments. And again, you'll see there's E, and E, lump sum payments E. And this relates to where you're making back pays to employees. And depending on what time the extra pay was actually incurred, changes the tax rate that's applied to it. So you do actually, if you're back paying somebody for a number of years, you do actually have to be able to split out the amounts that belong to those different years because they are taxed differently. So the other lump sums there, B and D, as per the previous slide, depending on what it is you've paid somebody, would be which payroll category you would link. So on the right, you can see lump sum payment E accrued prior to the 1st of July 2013 linked to back pay. Now, as I said, if you've got people with different years worth of back pays, again, you'll have to have separate payroll categories so that you can link them. You can't split one payroll category across those three different types of lump sums.
Important one that I found a bit tricky with these, or just to remember, is that know that it's the highlighted field in the left side that you're looking at to linking. Forget about basically the other lines that are there, but that can be just a visual thing that could trick you up. But just be mindful that where you've got the cursor or the highlighted field, like the lump sum payment A, is what you're linking to.
That's right. That's the category you're matching.
See the mouse move for somebody.
Okay, so this slide shows down the bottom in the payment summary field, there's a total tax withheld. It should default in for you that on the right-hand side it will tick PAYG withholding. That should be the default. What you might need to add in here is if you've been withholding extra tax for employees, in the payroll category there will also be an extra tax category, and you would also need to link that category to the total tax withheld. And what that does is it picks up all the tax, whether the employee paid extra or whether it's just the normal PAYG, and it will put it all together so you know that's what's owing to the ATO.
So normally you'd be doing that through a deduction field, wouldn't you?
Yeah, that's right. So it would normally be a extra tax, and it might be, you know, extra tax N Brosnan, extra tax M Lark. So you might find that there's a couple there that you have to link just to make sure you pick up all the tax. So the next screen will come up and there'll be a list of your employees down the left hand side and zeros all down the right hand side. And in the top right hand corner there's a box that will say link superannuation categories, and that will open this. Now in the next slide we talk about what RESC is. It's superannuation that has to be reported separately on the payment summaries. So for example, salary sacrifice super. So what you would be doing on this screen is you would tick next to salary sacrifice super or employer additional in certain circumstances, but generally speaking it'll only be the salary sacrifice stuff that gets ticked here. And what this does is it just pulls out that type of super to put it in a different box on the payment summary. So what you do is you tick salary sacrifice, for example, say OK, and then go back, and the button to the left of the link superannuation category says import the information. And if you hit that, it'll bring in the dollar values of those figures for you. You can manually overwrite them, but generally speaking, if you've got MyOb set up properly, it will link and import those figures for you.
And you'll be able to then cross-check those with what you've separately identified previously, and what should be the right figure for, say, that particular person or persons.
Yes, that's right. You should be able to tick that off against the information. The other report that's really useful is the payroll detail report, the activity detail report, because that gives you a bit more information for each person. So you might find when you're ticking these sorts of things off that that report is quite useful to make sure you've picked up all the various payroll categories that went to people and also the types of salary sacrifice or super they might have had.
Okay, to help you understand with regards to the super RESC scheme, the reportable employer superannuation contribution, RESC super, this is for super that is in excess of super guarantee charge, which is of course currently 9.5%, that an employer makes on behalf of their employees. RESC includes contributions where employee influences the rate or amount of super contributed for them. For example, if your employment contract entitles you to an employer-funded super in excess of the SGC, this superannuation must be recorded as RES super in the payment summary. It's only the portion that's above the 9.5. So an exception to that is if the employees are entitled to additional super above the 9.5% as per their EBA or their award, then this is not considered to be RESC super. So here's a simple chart giving you some guidance to help you in this one. So again, this is one of the areas that where you've contributing extra or they're doing the sacrifice, you need to be able to identify those so that you can link them to the appropriate screen. This is just a tip regarding what we've already mentioned, just as a reminder. Okay, the next sort of screen that will appear is the reportable fringe benefits. Now, you only need to put in figures here if most of this information you manually input. So the staff, do your staff receive any fringe benefits? Now, you might need to go off and find out whether that's a taxable fringe benefits. There are some exempt ones and they may not apply. So basically, if an employee's total fringe benefits, say that they salary sacrifice to their credit card or something other than an exempt category, and remembering this is for the FBT year, so it's a slightly different year, so it can be confusing. So it'll be from 1st of April 2015 to the 31st of March, and if those exceeded $2,000, the value of those, then the amount must be grossed up by an applicable factor, which depending on whether it's GST in it, not GST, whether it's been claimed. I won't go into too much detail because it's a bit complex, and it needs to be reported in the reportable fringe benefit amount column against that employee. Now, if you are giving fringe benefits and maybe this is opening up a whole new can of worms for you. You need to comply with whatever the appropriate legislation. If you're using fringe benefits and they're done through some sort of salary sacrificing arrangement with a third-party provider, they should provide you with the information that you need to put into this field. And we'll leave that at that because and you may need to talk to the tax office if you've got other dilemmas.
So once you've got all that information in, the next screen that will come up will be one that asks you to review the payment summaries. And what you can't see on our slide is that all the employees' names will be listed down below, along with their tax file numbers. And what you can look at here is you don't have to, at this point, save the payment summaries or print the payment summaries. Down the bottom of the screen on the right-hand side, it asks you, do you want to have a look at the verification? And you will say yes there. Now, what the verification looks like is this. And so this just helps you ensure you've got all the information. So you can see that you've got 15 records, which means you've got 15 employees. So if you've got 20 employees, there's probably a few missing. It also shows you the total tax withheld and the total gross payments that you're using. And these are the amounts that you'll be able to see on your payroll activity summary reconciliation. The other thing to note is that you really, on the bottom right hand side, want to print the preview verification report. Now what this does is if you've got any differences in your number of records or the tax or the gross, the verification report details by employee who's got what, and that lets you tick it off against the payroll activity summary report that you've already extracted previously. And that helps you identify if anybody's missing or if anybody's got a category, payroll category that you haven't linked somewhere in the previous steps. The only thing I will point out about the verification report is that it is alphabetical by somebody's first name. Don't ask me why, but that's the way it works. So you might find you have to search a little bit for people to match the order that they are in the other reports. What we do with this verification report is we just make sure that it reconciles back to our extracted reports. So you can see here, this is the report from our very beginning slides where we've got the total wages and the total taxes that are withheld. These are the total amounts that you should be reporting in your verification. Keeping in mind though, that salary sacrifice super, for example, will reduce the gross wages. So you might need a line in this report that says, here's the total wages, less my salary sacrifice, which means my gross wages may be, say, $150,000, and that's what I'm looking for on my verification report. So that's why we go through this reconciliation process right at the beginning, so you sort of know what the end result needs to look like.
And also note that you'll notice with the verification report, it rounds off the cents. So you will get a slight variance. You'll notice that there's a variance in this one of about $7. Depending on the number of employees, it could be, if it's within, say if you've got 20 employees and it's, the variance in that total rounded figure is something between, $10 or $20, but that would be normal.
Yeah, that's fine. Don't freak out if it's that. If it's any more than that, feel free to freak out, go back and have another look. Now, again, MyOb lets you go backwards and forwards between these reports. It's not shown on our slides, but down the bottom of these screens, there's back and next buttons, and you can switch between the two without affecting anything that you've done. So if you find that you go and you have a look at the preview verification and that you're missing an employee or you haven't ticked one of the payroll categories, you can go back to the screen where you do your linking and correct it there, and then go forward and do the verification report. It is quite forgiving, it is quite flexible. The whole purpose is to make sure you've got your information right before you print anything or give any employee anything. So it is a little bit weird the way it works in MyOb, in that the sort of print payment summaries comes before the verification. So just tab through that and then carry on. Here's a list of what we're talking about when we're saying verifying the payroll information. So as Neil said, there can be some roundings. I myself wasted much time the first few times I did this looking for $20. I need to find out it was actually a rounding issue. But as we said, if it's any more than sort of $10 to $20 difference, then it's not rounding, it's something else. All right. So as we've shown you, you need to compare your payroll activity summary report to the PAYG and gross amounts on verification screen. Allowances will be shown separately, so these also may need to come out of your total gross wages amount. So car allowance may show up on your payroll activity summary in gross wages, but for your payment summaries it won't. ETP payments will be the same way. They will show up separately and you will just go back and make sure that they agree. So you might need to sort of, as Neil said, unpack that gross wages figure a little bit from your payroll activity summary. Make sure you've got the right number of employees. If you're missing one, you may find that you haven't got somebody set up properly, or that they're inactivated, or that you've put a termination date. Termination date shouldn't block them from appearing in the payroll reports, but those are the sorts of things you need to do. Make sure that everybody you paid money to during the year gets a payment summary. Then you need to, or if your figures are right, well then great. But I always cast my eye over the individual verification just to make sure that everybody looks correct and that everybody's there and they've kind of got what I would expect to see. Once you've done that, you can go back to the previous screen and print and save the individual payment summaries. So what we suggest is that you print 2 copies, one for the employee, one to keep on your file as per your legal obligation. You can also print one for the employee and then PDF the others. Now they will PDF into separate documents, which is quite useful because if somebody loses theirs, and inevitably somebody does, you can just go in and print their individual one off. We've said it before, they've got sacrifices or allowances and so on, the gross wages in the verification report will have been reduced by these amounts, so you should be able to identify those. If they don't match, you need to go back and figure out why. These figures should match. There should be a very clear trail from what you paid people to the payment summaries, and if there isn't, then there's an issue and you need to go back and figure out what.
And it might just simply be an allowance that wasn't ticked against gross payments or something like that. But at least, yeah, so you just look at that summary report and match it together. But
yeah. Now for most people, this will be a fairly straightforward process. Most of you will just have made normal gross payments, you'll have withheld tax, and it'll be quite a simple process. But the more you do about checking along the way, the easier the entire thing will become. So we've talked about this screen where you can review.
So we've gone back to that earlier screen because it's sort of slightly out of
the so you can see here it is a bit odd because it's got review the payment summaries before you verify. If you look on the left-hand menu there. But as I said, there's a back button on the bottom left-hand of the screen that'll come up and you can just go back and forward as you will. So saving the payment summaries, you can PDF them onto a system somewhere, and then you can print them as well.
And on the online my version, I understand you believe you can actually email summaries, which is not a feature in the old classic version.
Yeah. So
almost there.
Almost there. The next thing to do is to create the mdupe file, which again Maya will come up with a message saying, are you ready to create the mdupe file? And you say, yes I am. And it saves it. You then will be asked to save it almost like any other file, but if you tried to open it, it would be nonsensical because it's all just the data in electronic format. So you need to create this. This will be the file that you send off to the ATO and lodge with them, and you also want a copy on in your payroll summary folder that we talked about earlier. You also should do a backup of your data file, and you need to call it something pretty obvious that this is the one I did the payment summaries in. What's really, really important to remember is if you roll into the new financial year, you will not be able to do payment summaries. If you roll into the new payroll year, you won't be able to do your payment summaries in that new live file. So if your last pay is on the 29th of June and you find that you don't have enough time, you might be in trouble. So do not roll into the new the new tax year until you've done your payment summaries, because otherwise you'll end up preparing payment summaries for the 2017 year. Okay? You need to have the payment summaries to the employees before the 14th of July. They will start bugging you for them on the 1st of July. You've got no obligation to get them to them before the 14th, okay? You've also, as we said, now got the information to complete your annual declaration for work cover. Make sure you include the super, as we said before. Once everything agrees, everybody's happy, you've printed out your payment summaries, then you can roll into the new payroll year. That will update the tax rates, update any Medicare levy changes, as long as you've got a current subscription to MyOb. If you don't have a current MyOb subscription, you need to get one, because otherwise you'll be using out-of-date tax.
Yep, and they have sent out the new files for uploading the new pay rates, but don't do them. That's an absolute last step.
Yes, don't change anything until everything else is done. So one thing we haven't gone into a lot of detail on is eligible termination payments and how these are dealt with. The reason for this is they are quite complicated, and depending on what the payment was made up of, when it was paid, there are slightly different issues around it. But essentially, ETPs are excluded from the normal payment summary. What the system does is actually generate a separate payment summary for ETPs. We would strongly recommend that you get expert advice if you've had an ETP during the year, just to ensure that what you're reporting to the ATO is correct, because if it's not, you could actually end up with an employee who gets a big tax bill where they shouldn't have had one. So if you've made ETPs, seek expert advice on how best to process that at payment summary time. Yay, job done for this year. And 12 months from now, you'll have to watch this webinar again to remember how you did it this year. As always, as members of CMS, if you've got questions, please do ring us. Depending on what your situation is, we may or may not be able to give you technical advice. You might find that we refer you on to the ATO, but certainly from a procedural point of view, we can give you a hand to help you get through this process. But just keep in mind that slow and steady, get all your information together, be quite systematic in the way you work, and it all should fall into place quite smoothly.
So preparation is the key. Anyway, trust it all goes well.
Yep.
And
we hope to hear from you soon. If you get it all done, give yourself a big pat on the back and let us know. Thanks for your time.